Hello everyone, my name is Louis Soltero at Global Marine Networks, and this is a part one of a two-part video series on setting up your Inmarsat ISAT phone to do data and specifically to do email with our Xskate software. In this particular video, we will concentrate on upgrading the firmware and installing the device drivers for the phones so that they'll communicate with your computer. In the second video, we'll focus on installing the email software and doing an email session over the ISAT phone. So let's go ahead and get started. A few things you need to know before you can do data on the ISAT phone is that one, the firmware probably needs to be upgraded on your phone. Currently, all of the ISAT phones in production have older firmware that is not data capable, and so firmware update is required. You can download or acquire the latest version of the firmware from your airtime provider, and it'll come in a specific file that is about 20 megabytes. The other thing that you need to know is that most SIM cards currently activated for the ISAT phone are not data enabled, since the service currently does not support data. And so you'll need to contact your provider and have them enable the data services for your particular phone. So Inmarsat has announced that they will be releasing the data probably at the end of March or early April, so very soon now. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, we need to acquire a firmware. On my desktop, I have a file here called Pro Build V305B, which is the firmware file, and the number corresponds to the version number. You can easily check the version number on your phone by turning your phone on, hitting the menu button on your phone, and then going down to the tools icon, which is the crescent wrench, selecting that, and then arrowing down to about, and then hitting enter, and the firmware version will be displayed there. The oldest version that will do data is version 3.05B. I assume that by the time the ISAT data is released, there'll be a new version of the firmware. But today we will show you how to install this particular version number to upgrade the firmware. So let's go ahead and get started. We need an ISAT phone and we need the USB cable. And at this time we want the USB cable to be unplugged from the computer. Now, I have a Windows 7 64-bit machine here. The procedure for installing the drivers is going to vary based on the version of Windows you have. It's a similar procedure. I'll refer you to the Inmarsat documentation for instructions on installing the firmware on other versions of Windows. Version 7, Windows 7 is the most current version, which is probably what you'll have on a new computer that you purchase at a local retailer. So to get started, again, we have the ISAT phone is unplugged from the computer, and we're going to go ahead and load the Inmarsat CD, the CD that came with your ISAT phone, and go ahead and run the tool that is available there. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so right now I'm inserting the disk into the computer, and in a minute here we should see the auto run pop-up. We'll go ahead and select the auto run, and this is the software that's provided on the disk with your satellite phone. Okay, so here we are. The browser has launched, and we have a menu. Of course, we want to be in English since that's the language we speak. We accept the terms, the licensing agreement, and then we go to the software section, and we want to install the USB drivers. So we'll click on that, and then we'll sit back and wait for a minute. The installer will ask us if we want to install the drivers. We say yes, and we go ahead and tell it to go ahead and install the drivers. So we just there's 5 different devices that get installed on the ISAT phone, and so we'll just tell it to go ahead and install all the drivers since they're all required. I've lost count. I think that was the 4th one. and we've installed the software. At this time, we can now go ahead and connect the Isatphone to our computer. Any USB port will do. So just go ahead and plug that in at the moment, and you should see, here we go, you should see a message on the bottom of the Windows screen that says that the drivers are currently being installed. And we see from the status that indeed 5 drivers were installed and that they're ready for use. Again, the procedure is going to be different for different versions of Windows. For Windows 7 it's pretty straightforward. For Windows XP it's a little more tedious, but you get the general idea. So the drivers are now installed and ready for use. The next thing we need to do is we need to install the firmware upgrade tool, which is some software that's available on this CD. So we go ahead and select the firmware upgrade tool, and we launch that installer. Okay, here we go. Windows is asking us if we want to go ahead and install that. We'll say yes. We now have the installer. We run the installer, and then we can go ahead and run the application. The application can be run at any time by going to the Start menu, All Programs, and under Isatphone Pro, you'll see the Isatphone Update tool there. So if you don't want to do the firmware update at this time, you can go ahead and run it anytime in the future by just selecting that particular menu entry. I'm going to go ahead and exit the browser since we no longer need this browser, and we'll take a look at this tool. The first thing we need to do here is we need to browse for the firmware. So we'll click on the Browse button. My firmware resides on the desktop, so we'll go ahead and select it. There's our file, Pro Build version 305B, and we'll select Open. We'll then hit Next. And well, at this point it wants us to disconnect the Isatphone, so make sure that you disconnect the Isatphone. Once the Isatphone is disconnected, go ahead and hit Next. The software will detect that the Isatphone has been reconnected. Once you reconnect it, you then start the Start Upgrade button and wait about 15 minutes for the firmware to upgrade on your phone. When your phone is complete, it'll restart. Go ahead and then check the menu entry. Again, go to the menu entry on the console for the satellite phone. Go down to the System, Tools, and select the About, and confirm that the version number is indeed 3.05B or newer, and at that time you should be able to do data. So that concludes this first segment of the video. In the next segment, video 2, we will focus on installing the email software and doing data connections through your satellite phone. And so we'll see you in a minute for the next video. Thanks for your time, and take care.